We took 8 or 10 bombs. 7 minutes after 8, we took a bomb alongside number 2 turret, went through 5 decks into the lower handling room. We had 1 million pounds of powder for turrets 1 and 2. We blew up.
In the summer of 1939, hostilities raged across Europe and Asia as the world was on the brink of war. But as the United States of America sat in relative peace and isolation, young Louis Conter of Denver, Colorado, thought only of playing football and furthering his education.
Well, I was in the last year of my high school, Weaver's High School in Denver, and I graduated. My neighbor, Dooley Wicks, he had joined the Navy, and so we went down with him while they signed over. The Navy says, "Come on and take your exams." And we said, "We're going to college and football, I play football and everything." They said, "That's all right, there's an 8-9 month waiting list at that time to get into the Navy." So we took our exams, all passed them naturally and everything. We were in good shape in those days. And November the 1st, about 8:10, my mother came up and says, "Are you in trouble, Lou?" And I said, "No, I'm not." She says, "Well, somebody's asking for Louis Anthony Conter on the phone." So I got dressed, went down and answered the phone. It was the Navy Department. And they says, "We got a draft going out at 5:45 for San Diego. We're 6 men short, and we got to fill it up. Would you like to sign up for 4 years?" At that time, you get $17 a month for the boot camp for the 90 days, and then you got $21 a month, board and room. So I signed up and called my girlfriend, told her I was leaving. I left at 5:45, and that's my first train ride from Denver to San Diego. Got in San Diego the next day, and 3 months of boot training, and after boat training, I was assigned to the USS Arizona in Long Beach.
The USS Arizona was a battleship of the United States Navy and Lou's home for the next 2 years. In the spring of 1940, the Arizona would embark to Oahu, Hawaii, to a U.S. naval base called Pearl Harbor. But Lou, not satisfied with merely sailing the open seas, turned his ambitions to the skies.
We had put in for flight school, Johnny and I. I'd lay up on my bunk and study and everything else because you don't do much in Liberty. And so Admiral Calhoun signed the request and sent it back. In November of 41, we got our orders to flight school. And so we went and made reservations on the Lurleen, and we were going to come back and go back to Pensacola. And Captain Van Valkenburg called us down and said, "We're going back to December the 19th to Long Beach to pick up our 1.1s." And said, "I'm not going to waste $5,000 of the Navy money." He says, "So you wait and go back and go to Pensacola from them." I mean, "Yes, sir." In those days, you told the captain, "Yes, sir." And you didn't say, "No, I got my orders, so let me go."
But Lou's plans for flight school would suffer a major interruption. As 1941 drew to a close, the United States could no longer remain isolated from the surrounding World War.
Japanese, they started this war in 1932. They started going through China and going down to Singapore. Churchill in Britain was losing out to Germany, getting bombed to hell. Churchill with Roosevelt wanted us in the war to help them out. And people just didn't want to be in war. So Roosevelt was having a hard time getting anything done. And so Colonel Thorpe, who was one of our intelligence officers down in Indonesia, sent a dispatch to Roosevelt December the 4th, telling him that the Japanese fleet was moving somewhere, but only 1 or 2 of the ships came south, and they thought the others were going across the North Pacific. So we all knew something was going to happen, we just didn't know when. And so then Sunday morning, of course, Pearl Harbor hit. It started at 5 minutes to 8 in the morning, and we were all tied up. I had all of the battleships in there, which was bad. We took 8 or 10 bombs. 5 or 7 minutes after 8, we took a bomb alongside number 2 turret, went through 5 decks into the lower handling room. We had 1 million pounds of powder for turrets 1 and 2. We blew up. Guys coming running out of the fire and wanted to jump over the side, and it was burning all around the ship. So Commander Fuqua told us, knock them out if you have to. Render them unconscious, lay them down on deck till we can get them into the boat and get them to the hospital. So that's what we did for 20, 25 minutes. We got about 16 of them laid down on deck there waiting. And got them over to the hospital. We came back and carried fire hoses into the fire because the ships couldn't get under the fire. It was blazes 1,000 feet. I mean, it was really hot and bad. And so we fought the fire until Tuesday, got it out, and we had to let the ship cool down for 4 days before we could go aboard it. And we went aboard and we started diving on the ship to bring out, see if we get anybody out of the ship. But they were all dead. So finally, after a couple of days, Commander Fuqua called it off, said, abandon ship.
By the end of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, over 2,400 Americans were killed. Nearly half of that number were lives lost on board the USS Arizona. Though many bodies were pulled from the wreckage, more than 900 could not be recovered from the sunken ship and remained entombed within the Arizona to this day. Immediately following the Japanese attack, the United States was fully invested in bringing an end to the Second World War. Soon, American forces were on the attack in Africa, Europe, and the Pacific, and Lew finally had the opportunity to complete flight school.
We're in the 3rd week in January at Pensacola, 7 days a week and 7 nights a week. And November the 15th, we did our time and got graduated. And we got our wings. When I got out of flight school, I went to VP-11, which is in San Diego, and they kept us there for 3 weeks while they painted all of our planes black because we're the first Black Hat Squadron. And we left there in January 43, and then we went on down to New Guinea, and we spent 2 years in combat. We carried 2 1,000-pound bombs and 2 500s, dive bombed the Japanese fleet up northern New Guinea and north of New Britain Island and Admiralty Islands, and then to go back to Port Moresby. I had 200 commissions in the Black Hat. September of 43, we go up the coast of New Guinea at 700 or 800 feet. We got it way up just about to Wewak, and the shot went through the after end and hit the parachute flare there and exploded one. Of course, we were on fire from the engine and back. We had to land immediately, and all 9 men on the ship, we got out through the pilot's escape hatch, but that was just before dark. And Gordon Kennington said, guys, say your prayers. We're 7 miles offshore. We got sharks all around us, and I don't think anybody can swim that far and be dark for half an hour. When I said, bulls, I said, yet in a circle, you're not dead yet. Grab each other, hold each other, tread the water lightly, and we were in the water for about 30 minutes, and as the sharks come along, hit them in the nose with your fist, but I hit the first one and it swam away. So another PBY saw us on fire and came back. They saw we didn't have a boat out and threw one of the lifeboats out to it, and I went and got it and got the guys on it. We got into New Guinea in the jungle, and the Japanese there, and they're looking for you. And I hid the guys and told them, just be quiet. And so the second night, I heard that's a PT boat, they're looking for it. So my plane captain and I got our boat, went out, we got 50, 100 feet away from them. They had those 50 calibers pointing right at us. I had turned those GD guns away from them. They said, "That's Connor, come on aboard." So we went aboard. And I said, "Let's go back and get the other 7 guys." They went in there and they were back in an hour with all 7 men. And we turned south, went back down towards Millersby to get to our tender. We got to the tender, had briefing that morning, breakfast that morning, dinner that night, breakfast the next morning. The next night at 5:30, we took another PBY and went out for 13 and a half hours. That's what we did in those days.
Of the men who survived the PBY crash, one Lieutenant Commander Gordon Kennington credited Lou for saving his life.
And his daughter was born in 47 after we came back and he got married and daughter. And she said, "Dad always said, if it wasn't for Lou, you wouldn't be here because I would have been dead." And she said, "Here I am, 70-some years old." She was born in 47. And says, "I've had a big life and happy and you know, but it was worth it."
And that would not be the only lives Lou would save over the course of the war. In December of 1943, Lou took part in a rescue mission to save over 200 Australian soldiers trapped behind Japanese lines.
They were intelligence people. We dropped behind the lines. The Japanese sent a whole division into Wewak. That's 15,000 Japanese soldiers. We had to fly into northern New Guinea in the Sepik River, go up and land in the river and pick up 15, 16 and take off. And we jump into the clouds because the Zeros were on us. We'd go up to 9,000 feet in the clouds and turn south and fly for an hour and 15, 20 minutes and went down and landed in Port Moresby, dropped people off and went up and got another load. And we brought out 219 men in 3 days, free and clear.
By the turn of 1944, Japan had long since lost the advantage in the war, but continued to maintain a relentless foothold throughout the Pacific Islands. Though the Allies slowly achieved victory after victory, each one was hard-fought and bloodier than the last. By August of 1945, U.S. President Harry Truman faced a difficult decision: send American troops into what was sure to be the deadliest invasion yet, or unleash a new weapon, the likes of which the world had never seen.
We had 1.5 million men trained to land in Japan in November of 45, and we had another 1.5 million starting to train to land in March of 46, and we figured we'd have 500,000 to 600,000 casualties because even the 12 and 14-year-old kids in Japan were taught to have a grenade and walk up to an American soldier and put it in his pocket and pull the pin and run like hell. And so he gave the order to drop the first one and drop the second one, and they quit. You just had to do what you had to do at that time to save 500,000 lives. And you would have lost them if we'd have landed in November of 45. And so September of 45, they signed the treaty. So.
On September 2nd, 1945, nearly 4 years since the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Second World War was finally over. To this day, the USS Arizona rests beneath the waves of Pearl Harbor. Built directly above the wreckage sits the USS Arizona Memorial, dedicated to the men who perished aboard ship. The memorial sees more than 1 million visitors every year, and one of its most frequent is Lieutenant Commander Louis Conter.
My wife and I used to go to the memorial all the time. Every year I went to the 50th, I think it was, in 91. We buried a few guys on there that wanted to be buried on the ship. Divers take their ashes down and put them with the other guys in the ship, in the turret. On the memorial, where they had a plaque, they got all names on the forward there. And I walk in, naturally, salute them and stand there and say a prayer. Thank God my name is outside on the plaque out there rather than on the wall up there.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh from Memoirs of World War II, and I just want to say thank you for watching this episode. Our goal is to capture as many World War II veteran stories as we can from all over the world, but we can't do it alone. If you'd like to help us in this mission, consider supporting us through Patreon and check out our website memoirsofworldwar2.com for more information. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. Again, we want to thank you for your support, and thanks for watching.